started so that we can get everybody out of here on time. And those of you who haven't grabbed something, feel free to grab some sandwiches or something to drink here. My name is Hakeem Mokhtar. I'm the Administrative Director on the Center, or the Administrative Director for the Center on the Legal Profession. We were previously the Program on the Legal Profession. We've recently changed our name to the Center. So if you see references to PLP around campus, we were PLP, we're now CLP, so we are referring to ourselves, and I'll have to remind myself, probably do this again next time when I introduce a speaker, but we are no longer PLP, we're the Center on the Legal Profession here at Harvard Law School. And essentially what we do is we're a research program that studies how the profession is evolving, both here domestically and abroad. So in order to do that, we like to bridge a bit of the practice with the academy, and a great way to do that is by bringing in fantastic practitioners and academics who are interested in some of these same issues. Our guest today, Rachael Rollins, is the Chief Legal Counsel for the Massachusetts Port Authority. She was also the General Counsel for the Massachusetts Department of Transportation and the MBTA. She was actually the first woman GC of the MBTA in history, and the first to serve as GC for both entities. She's a former U.S. Assistant U.S. Attorney for the District of Massachusetts, and also a past president of the Massachusetts Black Lawyers Association. So I think you'll see that Rachael's career is actually incredibly fascinating and epitomizes what we in CLP look to examine about how careers have evolved over time and the sort of challenges that practitioners face and have to overcome in order to be successful. So if you will, please welcome Rachael.
Thank you. So what I'd love is for this to be very interactive. I would like you to interrupt me if you have questions about something that I'm saying. If you feel like I'm either being too vague or move along, please. If you think that I'm spending too long speaking about something. One of the things I just wanted to talk to you guys about was a little bit about my background. And so I'm 43. I am currently the Chief Legal Counsel, as he said, at Massport. Most of you know that to be Logan Airport. But we also are a massive landlord. We own tons of real estate in South Boston. So if any of you have been to the New Legal, Del Fresco's, that whole area, Massport owns all of that land. So we are, there are 3 airports that we're responsible for: Logan Airport, Worcester, and Hanscom Air Force Base. What I wanted to just tell you about was kind of how I got to the position that I'm in right now. So a little bit about my background: born and raised in Cambridge, oldest of 5 kids, went to Buckingham Brown and Nichols, which is private school right here, and public school up until 4th grade. When I got to BB&N, I learned about a sport called lacrosse, which you guys are all very young, but back then it was like completely cutting edge, and I had no idea what it was. I became relatively good at that. Hi, Joe. My neighbor Joe is here. And got a scholarship to go to college. So I'm the oldest of 5. My parents told me the gift to you is we'll pay for BB&N, and then you're going to college, but you're paying for it because we have 4 kids behind you to deal with. So got a scholarship, went to UMass Amherst. We did great our first year. I had a full contract for 4 years of college, and after my freshman year, the athletic director announced that he was cutting the women's lacrosse, volleyball, and tennis teams. So my first question was, I signed a contract, do you still pay for my school? They said yes. So I said, awesome, I don't have to work out anymore, you're paying for my school, this is amazing. 600 pounds later, I go home that summer, I come back sophomore year, and I realized I really miss the camaraderie of sports. I miss sort of interacting with people and all of this. And then I realized I only knew about the women's lacrosse team. I didn't know about volleyball and tennis yet. I started hearing about that. And then I realized, wait a minute, our men's football team hasn't won a game in like 4 years. So I was one of 2 full scholarship athletes on my women's lacrosse team. We had 10 or 15 players on the team, but only 2 full scholarships. The men's football team, which was literally, in like infinity at that point, had I think 75 full scholarships for players, or something ridiculous, way more than 2. So after we started asking a couple of questions and tried to meet with the athletic director who would meet with us, we got a lawyer, we drafted a Title IX lawsuit, he miraculously wanted to meet with us, and then 2 years later, our teams were reinstated. So that sort of really got me interested in the intersection of sports and law. And I was convinced at that time that I was going to be a sports lawyer. So I stayed for 2 more years at UMass Amherst. I had won a national championship in high school for lacrosse. What no one talks about with Title IX is after you get your team back, there's no scholarships. We had a men's soccer and a women's field hockey coach teaching our women's lacrosse team, and we're basically like going to shelters and offering people food to play lacrosse with us. Like, we didn't have any athletes that, you know, were Division I caliber athletes. So in my career, I have won a national championship and literally gone 0-17 for a season, and we were losing literally 0-17 in those games. So, you know, the sort of highest of the highs and the lowest of the lows. But what happened was I graduated from UMass and I went to Northeastern Law School, and I was sure I was going to be a sports lawyer. So I became the first intern in the history of the NBA Players Association after much determination and hard work. I was sure after sending multiple letters to the executive director when I got a response that it was going to be like a restraining order telling me to please leave him alone. I became the first intern in the history of the NBA Players Association. The first domino dropped. Every other job was very, very easy after that. I come back to Boston. I start working at the Boston Celtics. Not in the legal department, which was interesting, but in the marketing department. But I wanted to make sure I had some franchise on my resume. So, ironically, I was working in what's called the wives room, and my responsibility was I was paid $100 a game to make sure that the lights were on and the delicious food had arrived, and like millions of flat screen TVs. And I said, like, so I have to go to the game and sit in this room and eat snacks? Like, yes, please, I will happily do that. So once I did that, I graduated from Northeastern. I clerked in the appeals court for a year, and then I went to DC to get an LLM in labor at Georgetown. What was great was I was still in contact with people I knew at the NBA Players Association. They put me in touch with the NFL Players Association, which is in DC, so I worked there during my 1 year at Georgetown. Still fully convinced I was going to be a sports lawyer. I come back, I worked for the National Labor Relations Board for a little bit, doing labor stuff. I had does anyone know what high-lie is? Like that hooky game that everyone plays in Rhode Island. I had a couple of interesting cases there involving sports. And then I went to a firm called Bingham McCutcheon, which represented the Yawkey family before they sold the Red Sox, and also has a great relationship with the Kraft family. And I was convinced I was going to be doing a lot of sports law there. Didn't really work out that well with respect to that. A lot of it was antitrust work. I did a DA rotation when I was at Bingham and got the bug of wanting to be a prosecutor, and shortly thereafter left Bingham after 5 years to go to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Again, sort of realizing I don't know whether I'm going to do the sports thing or not, but the then executive director of the NBA Players Association was a former U.S. attorney from California, so no one ever looked sort of as, you know, CPCS or federal defender or assistant U.S. attorney as a bad thing. I wanted to get that trial experience. So I feel like I started in the civil division there, did a lot of really great healthcare fraud work. We do affirmative and defensive work. As you all know, the Department of Justice is a law firm for the federal government, so got a lot of great experience. And then something weird happened where I was called to interview for a position at the MBTA, because when I had clerked for a judge, the woman I clerked with ended up marrying later on the Secretary of Transportation for Massachusetts. So I had done really good work for a federal judge that is now passed, Judge Keaton, and one of his law clerks remembers me having worked there, and she kept telling her husband, you know, you're trying to diversify the MBTA, you're trying to diversify the Mass Department of Transportation, why don't you interview Rachel? And so he came in, and the first job he offered me was, you know, head of labor for the MBTA. And I said, like, why would I leave my job as an assistant U.S. attorney for that? Thank you for lunch, not really that interested. Went back to work, was doing great. He came back and said, what about if you're the number 3 lawyer for the T? I think the number 1 lawyer is going to be retiring soon. I said, am I going to get a contract? He said, no. I said, I don't like promises that aren't in writing, like, or why would I leave the US Attorney's Office to go to the MBTA, which I jokingly said to him, I defy you to open the newspaper and find one positive article about the MBTA. So I said, like, thank you again for lunch, this is delicious, goodbye. And good day, sir, right? So, so the third time he comes back, he says, what about you being the General Counsel of MassDOT? And then in 6 months, for the first time in the history of all these organizations, I'll make you the co-general counsel, or the general counsel of the MBTA as well. And I said, that I would do. And so I left. Perfect story of state government. When I started at Bingham McCutcheon, like if any of you go to a big firm, I feel like if any of you have seen the movie Coming to America, there were like rose petals thrown out when I arrived at Bingham. A big package came to my house before my secretary was waiting, my office was set up. When I showed up at MassDOT, the front door to the legal department was locked and I was knocking on the door and they were like, can I help you? So I was like, yeah, I'm the new general counsel. And they were like, Monica's the general counsel. So the woman that had the job that I was supposed to be in was still there. So I was like, awkward. So what I had to do was, you know, you have to learn not only the skills that you learn as a lawyer, but it's about, I had a department of 40 people that had no idea who I was. I then ultimately ended up having over 100 people reporting directly to me. It was the first time I had been a manager because, as you guys will see, when if you go to a law firm or if you're, you know, a defender or a prosecutor or work at a nonprofit, you know, the only person I had supervised to that point was my assistant that I shared with 5 other people, and I was the lowest person on the totem pole, so I would normally say, like, is there any way, oh, you can't? All right, I guess I'll just do this myself. Like, so I wasn't doing a great job, I think, managing. But what was interesting was I realized with the 2.5 years that I was at MassDOT and the T that you have to sort of build coalitions. You know, I wanted to be a manager that, or a leader, that I felt like my team would, you know, work late for me, would know that when they did a great job, you were coming to the meeting with the GM or the secretary and getting all the credit. If we screwed up and you promised that you had told me beforehand, I would take the blame for the thing that my department did. You will see in your life, if you've had jobs before coming here, or as you have jobs, or there are the leaders that, you know, I jokingly say will be killed by friendly fire. You know, like, these are the people that you lead either in an incredibly either abusive way, or you're not involved with your staff, or you don't treat people with respect. And any time that someone has an opportunity to sort of backstab you, they will. So, you know, not to get to gloom and doom, but I feel like what I really worked hard on was not only understanding the substance of the work that I was going to be doing at MassDOT and the T, but also really connecting with the people and learning the business of what it is that the MBTA and MassDOT did. So some of the, you know, very candidly, I don't think I was particularly well suited for the MassDOT job, which made me really uncomfortable. So MassDOT is a state agency. When the state gets sued, the Attorney General's office is their law firm. So when the state government gets sued, it's the Attorney General's office. Federal government gets sued, it's the U.S. Attorney's office. I was a litigator. I had come from the federal government. I was at a firm, Bingham McCutcheon. When people got sued, I knew what to do. I understood, you know, are we affirmatively suing someone? Are we responding as a defendant? What is the process? Are we promulgating discovery? I mean, I felt like I was very comfortable there. And I didn't have virtually any role aside from speaking to an assistant attorney general about all of MassDOT's litigation. So what I did was I met with my staff and said, listen, you know, I want to tell you a little bit about my background. Monica is sitting next to me. I know Monica knows much more than I do. And I'm going to be at the meetings with her, and you're going to email Monica and you're going to CC me, and it's going to be fine. And at some point you'll hear my voice probably to say, like, I don't understand that. But I think I gave them enough comfort to know that I wasn't trying to pretend that I knew more than they did. They were really the experts. My job was to make sure that the secretary, the GM, the board of directors, and the governor's office was always protected when it came to the decisions that the legal department was making. So what's interesting is I feel like I worked really hard to build those relationships. What ended up happening was during my tenure there, MassDOT the RMV, the Registry of Motor Vehicles, falls under MassDOT. And I guess every couple of years there's usually some big FBI investigation to the RMV when people are selling licenses and false information. So the FBI was handling that investigation through some of the contacts that I had at my previous job. We were able to really assist them with that. I think, you know, I got to know a lot of the assistant attorney generals pretty well. We had massive inquiries from the FTA and Federal Highway with respect to our employment practices. So my background with the federal government, dealing with massive investigations, having to coordinate with various federal and state agencies, I think was really helpful. During my tenure at MassDOT and the T, you know, we had massive takedowns with the RMV. We did the commuter rail procurement, which, you know, for me, I'm not joking, when I started this job as a federal prosecutor, they kept talking about procurement, and I literally was like, I don't even, is that in English? Like, what does that even mean? Like, so we were dealing with false claims that were filed against the federal government. Usually we would be dealing with the Army or some sort of contractor that had said, we're going to build tanks with 8 layers of, you know, metal or this many layers of paint on them, and they only did 1 or 2 layers of paint. And so every time they submit a bill to say, pay us for the work that we contracted for, it's a false claim, and we would have to go through the process there. So I feel like we did a couple of massive procurements while I was the head of the MBTA. The commuter rail procurement ended up being $2.68 billion procurement that we were responsible for. It's pretty much 8 years contract with 2 2-year extensions. Really intricately involved day-to-day process there, overseeing that. As I said, massive investigation by different federal agencies. We did a lot of work with what are called PPPs, which, you know, public-private partnerships, trying to get more private industry involved in transportation. You know, other things that we did was getting new red and orange line cars, so we're dealing with different companies from different countries trying to build our products. And then what happened was, one day the secretary called me in and said, the chief legal counsel at Massport is leaving, would you be interested in interviewing for that position? So I think, you know, I don't want to say to you guys that it's all about who you know or the work that you do, but I have been very fortunate to be in situations where I feel like I've worked hard and shown the people that I report directly to that I have their best interests at heart, keeping people informed of potential problems. I think I have a really good relationship with the governor's chief legal counsel to make sure that if there's going to be any media story that is negatively going to reflect upon either the MBTA, MassDOT, Massport, or the governor's office, that we let them know, not after they pick up, you know, the Herald or the Globe, but once we know that there could potentially be a problem. And now I've literally just gotten to my 1-year anniversary at Massport, and we are, you know, doing massive, really interesting, different expansions with respect to international airlines that are coming into Boston. We're doing a lot of development with respect to the convention center. As many of you guys have heard, Boston is being considered potentially for the Olympics coming in, I believe, 2024, and they were looking possibly at Massport for some of our properties that we own. We own an inordinate amount of land in the sort of seaport area, but we are at the table there, and I was very, very surprised about how little I really knew about transportation and how important it was to people. I think when I had, going back to that lunch that I had with the Secretary of Transportation, I thought, why would I, like the U.S. Attorney's Office, I was in the civil division, and then I went to the criminal division, and I was doing sort of gang and gun and drug cases and really interesting stuff, and I thought, why would I want to go like to deal with transportation? That seems so boring and different than what I'm doing. But in fact, transportation, unlike most any other one of the secretariats in the state, touches everyone's lives. Either you're riding your bike, and I've had a massive dispute with the town of Arlington and a bike lane they wanted to put in, and cars mad at bikes and bikes hating cars, or you hate the MBTA and that's why you drive everywhere, or you love the MBTA and that's why you don't have a car, or you're flying here, or you're walking there. I mean, there are socioeconomic issues, there are racial issues involved with public transit in certain neighborhoods, and we at the MBTA have our own police force. At Massport, we have 2 different sort of police forces. We have our own fire department. It's almost like running a little city. So it has been incredibly interesting work. I would love to kind of give you, a little bit more detail, but I want to make sure that I let people ask whatever questions they may have about, or ask me to speak more about specific things. But I think if you guys have questions, regarding your interest in maybe moving to the public sector, or, I think I've had a pretty broad career thus far in that I've had state clerkships, federal clerkship, appellate and trial level. I've been at a federal agency, state agencies, a big firm, the U.S. Attorney's Office, and been a lowly associate all the way up to running a department right now. So I think that the best way to do this is for people to feel comfortable asking, whatever question you honestly think is relevant or maybe not even relevant, and I'll try to answer it. Don't be shy. Go ahead.
What is something that you know now that you wish you knew like back then?
So, what is something that I'm learning now? How about that? I don't know, but I think it's really important for you guys to understand like general sort of corporations business law. Like when I started as the head of the legal department at MassDOT, I was given a budget. And I'm not lying. I know you're thinking I'm exaggerating. I literally looked at it and was like, so this chart, it was almost like I was looking at something in a different language because I had never had to do a budget before. Like as an assistant U.S. attorney, what happens is your chief says you have the next medical malpractice case, or we have to meet with ATF because they have 73 videos of 93 transactions of gun sales, and we have to go through the ones that we're going to take or give to the state. Nobody's asking for the budget on that. The federal agency is dealing with that. I didn't have to have any kind of management skills whatsoever, and I didn't come from a family, and I'm not implying that any of you did or didn't or what have you, but where we sat around with a monocle on and white gloves talking about what happened at our business or daddy's business that day. My parents are both in the Boston Public Teachers Union and did fine for themselves, but I did not understand how business works. There are still times where I meet with my CFO, which is a great relationship if you're a lawyer, where I'm like, I swear to God, if I see you judging me, John, I will punch you right in the throat. I have to ask you a question, and we're in our circle of trust here. Please explain to me in 6th grade words what the hell the following is. And I'm not joking. Will I say that at a board meeting? No. But will I take John out for a drink after work and make sure he explains this to me? Absolutely, because what my current boss wants, and you'll realize this as lawyers, there are some partners, there are some CEOs that want you to tell them no. They want the lawyer to be the person that is the end of it, and they get to say, you know what, I wish we could, but my lawyer is telling me we can't. There are some CEOs that look at lawyers as, we are the roadblocks, we're the people where innovation screeches to a halt, the legal department. You don't want to be looked at as that person. And what I've learned, which I wish I knew earlier, is I never say no to my boss, ever. What I say is, here are the risks of us doing that. And, when my daughter, who's 10, is like, you're getting warmer, if I say, the risk is, can someone walk 6 more miles and put their hand down because this hand is right here and that's how big it is? Or, look, there are mild risks in doing this. This is what it is. And then I literally say, you guys have a business decision to make. If you want me to stay, I can. Otherwise, let me know what's going on. If you decide to go forward, these are the steps you need to take to make sure that if we are sued or it is challenged, that you're thinking about the following 3 or 4 things. And our relationship is exponentially better than, you know, when I was like, do you have anything to say? Well, let me start with my 53, no, like CEOs aren't particularly happy about that. And for me, I feel like the most important thing is me being in the room and learning about the business of Massport. So to answer your question, absolutely if you understand business, hooray, and stop showing off about it, because I didn't, but, or take some fundamental classes to make sure you understand that. Because when you ascend through the ranks and you're running a department, right now, it's funny, I have 25 people reporting to me, 1/4 of the people that I had in my other 2 jobs, and, I am just as, if not more busy. The other role that I wanted to make sure you guys understand, which is really important for a general counsel, is I am counsel to the board of directors. So as a public agency, we are subject to open meeting laws. We are subject to public records requests. We are, have to comply with, the ethics commission's requirements. And so what I do is at the board meetings make determinations as to whether this can be in public session or executive session. We have the other thing, not just general sort of budgets, we issue bonds. Like when I got out of the U.S. Attorney's Office and people started talking about bonds, I felt like saying, like, James Bond? I'm not joking. I had very little business background. So another example of why you need to be friends with your CFO to sort of understand the flow of the money in whatever, whether it's a public or private entity that you work for. Other questions? Someone else, go ahead.
Would you ever consider going into like sports law again in the future?
That's a really good question. So, absolutely. I feel like you never, ever, ever give up on what your dreams are. And, for me, I would love to ultimately end up one day as like the first female executive director of the MBTA Players Association. What's interesting is you look at the people that have had the job that you want and figure out what the career path they took, but don't let that in any way discourage you. I feel like I got to Bingham McCutcheon after working for the NLRB in a very sort of specified area of law. Everyone has a labor and employment law department in their law firm. Very few people do traditional labor law. Most of them all do employment, but they don't understand unions, they don't understand organizing campaigns, they don't understand that you can violate labor laws even if you don't have a union. So I understood an incredibly small and intricate part of the law and utilized that to lateral into Bingham McCutcheon as a 3rd-year associate and work there for a while. A lot of people had said, oh, they don't take laterals, you gotta really be a summer associate before you go in. And my life has really been a less traditional path to some of those things. So for me right now, do I think that ultimately if a position opened up there and I felt like I was in a place where I could consider moving to New York and they would be interested in interviewing me? Absolutely. I have one of the other things I sort of wanted to talk about is you'll see as life continues for you guys, I have a 10-year-old daughter who, my parents live in Cambridge in the same house my mom and her 10 brothers and sisters were born in. She bought the house from her parents, and we have a house on the Cape that my father's parents used to live in, so we are pretty grounded here in Massachusetts. My daughter, and her dad, my ex-husband, are very, very close, and I think sort of ripping up my daughter to do this, but would I consider, with the massive salary increase and my season tickets everywhere, flying to and from New York? Hells yes. But I do think, looking at Billy Hunter, who was the former executive director of the MBTA Players Association, as I said earlier, he was the U.S. attorney. There are, I think, 3 U.S. attorneys in California. He was one of them at some point. So being a federal prosecutor, understanding and having different roles in legal positions, I think really suits you well to running an organization. I think my days as an assistant U.S. attorney, certainly the last 3 years running massive departments, legal departments, and then my experience in traditional labor law, having dealt with unions as an NLRB attorney, I think would make me incredibly well suited for that. And I love New York too. Go ahead.
Could you elaborate more about your clerkship experience?
Sure.
About maybe like the substance of the work you were doing, your relationship with your judge, and then also it inadvertently led to a job for you.
Sure. So Northeastern has the co-op program, as you guys have all heard. So I had 4 co-ops. My first co-op was at the Department of Revenue Child Support Enforcement Division. I still believed as a 1L that I was going to do sports law. And when I got to DOR, I said to them, hey, I really want to do sports. And they were like, yeah, you do know you're at child support, right? Shut up and go over and fill that form and leave us alone. Well, lo and behold, 6 weeks later, none of you will know who this is because you're too young, but Cedric Maxwell, who used cornbread from the Celtics, who's now a commentator, one of his many mothers of his many children had requested whether we could pierce his sort of pension and get child support from the pension. And what's interesting is that may have gone to somebody else, but because I had mentioned to my supervisor I wanted to do sports matters, they let me assist with that issue. And I got to sort of look into that little piece. The next clerkship I did, or my next co-op was with a federal judge called Judge Keaton. We normally do 3-month co-ops. Judge Keaton let me stay on for another 3 months while I was at school, which I'm sure violated some policy at Northeastern, so we'll blurb that out of whatever if we're taping right now. But I stayed on and continued sort of clerking with him for 6 months. It was during that time that Jane Willis, who's a great partner at Ropes and Gray, currently married to Rich Davey, the Secretary of Transportation, was Judge Keaton's full-time law clerk. So post-Harvard Law School graduate clerkship for Judge Keaton. Jane and I became friendly during my tenure as a co-op student, and Judge Keaton was fantastic. He let you act as sort of a courtroom deputy. A lot of the federal judges will have their clerks sort of walk in and sit at a table and you get to listen, and that's great. Judge Keaton, I would walk in and say like, all rise, you know, the Honorable Robert E. Keaton, you know, and I wanted to wear like a wig and white face and other crazy things. But he was like, please no, just read the thing and get it done. But what was great was I would sit there and swear in the witnesses. I mean, it was really exciting, and he let his law clerks really become involved, whether you were a full-time law clerk or a co-op, and we were all called Parakeetans, which was super cute, and I miss him a lot. But yeah, so that was a great experience. I had a wonderful relationship with Judge Keaton post my co-op. My next co-op was when I worked at the NBA Players Association. My last co-op was with a federal judge in Brooklyn, who was the exact opposite of Judge Keaton. So Judge Keaton is University of Texas, you know, he's Prosser and Keaton on torts, that Keaton. So my clerk, the federal judge I clerked for in Brooklyn, went to Brooklyn Law School at night, was a police officer, was the head of the homicide unit, literally walks around with a nightstick in his robe, like talking to people and not threatening them, but was just like the exact opposite of Judge Keaton. Judge Sterling Johnson Jr., still have a great relationship with him as well. And then when I graduated from law school, I was a 1-year clerk in the Mass Appeals Court, and still have a really good relationship with that judge. It was fascinating in the sense of I got to not only sit and watch great lawyers practice, in the district court federal trial level, I saw jury trials, I saw motion practice, I saw really good lawyers, and I saw some people that I was like, did you go to law school? And I think you've been drinking. But seriously, there were some great people and some people that you were like, wow, I'm not even done with law school yet, and I know that that was awesome, or I would never, ever, ever do that. Even better is when you go to the appeals court, it's all on the pleadings. I mean, you're not seeing what happened, you're reading everything. And it's funny, I remember the first time that I had to draft something for my judge, you know, I'm that distracted person where I read, you know, this brief and say like, well, obviously you win. And then you read this one and you're like, what? This guy's a liar, you know? So you're just sort of learning how to do it, drafting. I learned to be a much better writer from each of those judges. And what's great about the full clerkship is that it was just me when I was in the Mass Appeals Court for my one judge. With Judge Keaton, he had 2 or 3 co-op students, and then 2 full-time law clerks. The same with the federal judge in New York, in Brooklyn. But I still had a really close relationship with them, and you learn how to be a much better writer. You learn, I think, which is really important, even on the appellate side, oral, the skill of advocating orally, with people barraging you with questions when it's on an appeals court, and then also, times when realizing no one's read your pleadings, or you need to make sure you only have X number of minutes to synthesize and get your points across. So I strongly encourage people to get clerkships. It's also helpful because usually judges are wonderful letters of recommendation, and what's great about a Judge Keaton is virtually everyone 20 years ago that was sitting in these seats had Judge Keaton as a law professor here. So maybe even longer than that. And so a recommendation letter from him really went a far way for me. Anyone else? Go ahead.
Do you feel that a background in transactional work might have been better for preparing you for your current position than a litigation background?
That's a great question. I think if I had some, that would be helpful. Because, for example, right now with Massport, we had a terrible accident at Hanscom on May 31st where a G4 jet never became airborne and 7 people perished at Hanscom Air Force Base. There was a massive NTSB investigation, which is still ongoing, but we are preparing for litigation, and this is obviously, our thoughts and prayers go out to the family, but if there's going to be litigation in this, a transactional lawyer is going to be relying incredibly heavily on outside counsel because, the same way that I would never say I'm a transactional lawyer, I don't think a transactional lawyer could say, like, yes, I can explain to you what's going to happen in federal district court when this lawsuit's filed and all of the potential claims that might be coming down. So I think usually general counsels have a transactional background. What was great was my predecessor, because they were going to expand a runway at Logan about 15 years ago. They were considering it. They knew there was going to be massive litigation about that. They wanted a litigator, and the person that that the board ended up hiring was the first assistant at the U.S. Attorney's Office, who was a great trial lawyer, and I think that kind of helped a lot. But I rely very strongly on my outside counsel. I have great internal lawyers that have transactional backgrounds, but to your point, yeah, if I had some background there, I think it would be helpful. But I think just as important is understanding the litigation piece, and we're regulated by TSA, FAA. Certainly there are the Inspector General's office. So understanding the process of if there's an investigation and ultimately some finding or whether we challenge that, I think all of that is based in litigation. So I'm comfortable with the experience I have, but certainly having some of that experience would have been helpful too. So I don't know if firms do it, but when I was like a young kiddie I never did a summer associateship, but my firm, Bingham, when I was helping with the summer program, they let you split your time between litigation and business or transactional work. If you have the ability to do that, by all means do, because even if you can say with a straight face, yes, I only spent 17 hours doing it, but I was involved in a transaction with the following, or handled the following matter. I never had that experience. Now what's great is, as the GC, I've had to oversee, massive transactions. We had a refinancing, for example, of our bonds, and I was like my 3rd day in, and I called outside counsel and it was like, no one's leaving until I understand this. So bring a sleeping bag, pack some food, because I have to sign this, and is this 180 million American dollars? Why am I signing this? Where's the CFO? So, sort of understanding things a little better may have made me less nervous and grouchy. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm actually interested in local government, so the relationship between cities and states and transportation, so it's very fortuitous that you came, but it seems like people want to know more about your personal life. So that's the personal question, even though I have a legal question.
Ask a legal question too.
But the personal question is, Massachusetts is currently in an election year. And so how involved or not involved were you in the Massachusetts political scene? And do you think that helps at all in terms of a career in state or local government?
That's a great question. So I was not, I vote, but if you drive by my house, I'm not that house that has like 50 signs on it and you see me out there like beep, 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 beep. No, like on Saturday I'm watching Game of Thrones or at a soccer game with my daughter. So, I'm not particularly politically active, and I feel like my opportunities have come as a result of relationships I've built with people through the hard work that I've done. So, I think the governor knows who I am. Like if I, walked in a room, he'd probably smile and, say like she looks vaguely familiar, but this is not like he's my uncle or I, campaigned for him for 17 months prior. No, like absolutely not. But I do think there are lots of people that do that and, it results in them getting, getting positions. That was not something that I did. What was your other part?
Oh, well, I was a legal question.
Go ahead.
It's kind of weird. But, so a lot of transportation is local in terms of cities, for example, like Uber, bicycle, those are all local issues. But MassDOT and MBTA are state authorities. Mm-hmm. So is there tension between, city councils that want to make their own decisions, but then they have to kind of get a rubber stamp? Do you think that's the way it should be?
So one of the, I think, good examples of that, and I had no idea when I started, was I get to MassDOT and it's sort of, it is transportation related, but it's bizarre. Somebody keeps calling me about billboards, and my assistant said Governor Dukakis is on the phone to talk to you about billboards. My friends are all idiots, so I'm like, yeah, okay, hey, Governor Dukakis, and it's him. So I'm like, hello, Governor Dukakis, whatever. So we regulate billboards, MassDOT. I'm like, what are you talking about? I don't even know, like, why? And so the Highway Beautification Act is involved, but the process requires you to go to the city first and meet all of their requirements, and then come to the Mass Department of Transportation. Once we see that the city has signed off on all of this, you have to meet our either additional requirements. We went through some new regulations, and I think that's an example of us working incredibly well together. What's interesting with Uber, flight car, what is the Lyft, like the pink mustache stuff, we are totally in that game as Massport, right? Because literally the reason I was almost late is pulling out of, every cab in the entire Boston area wants to get a piece of Massport, because usually, I'm coming back and saying, drive me to New Hampshire unless I get a limo. It's the biggest game in town. So we are, along with San Francisco, which a lot of this stuff is starting in, at the cutting edge of, the Uber crisis, the flight, not crisis, but Uber, and whether, we're gonna get the fees that we require in order for people to do business at the airport. Same thing with Lyft. Flight car is basically lists their address as us, Massport. And flight car is the one where I drive and park my car and then fly off to Aguadilla, Puerto Rico for a week. You fly in, jump in my car, use it for a week, and then leave it back for me, and we have a transaction somehow. But they're listing us as their principal place of business. And so I'm in San Francisco, what? So I come home and I'm like, what's going on with flight car? City of Cambridge, one of my former colleagues who at MassDOT headed up the labor department is now the license commissioner for the city of Cambridge. Uber, is exploding in Cambridge right now. So what's great is I think with good relationships, we can try to realize, what the tensions may be, and then have uniformity. I think it's harder for us as an airport. I'm looking very closely at what San Francisco's doing, even though they're across the country, because we want to have uniformity, with respect to all the airports and treating the entities the same. But I can definitely see that there's frustration, I think, from city councilors sometimes with decisions that we make that they would consider sort of curbing innovation or not permitting them to go forward, or us saying, yes, this looks great, and a city saying, absolutely not, we don't want this here. So a good example of that is Medford, where I live. Mayor McGlynn loves billboards. City of Boston, Mayor Menino didn't.
Yeah.
So there was like, a shutdown of new billboard innovation in Boston, but in Medford, I'm not saying it's gonna look like Vegas one day, but it's, Mayor McGlynn is like, more money for the city, this is great. So, we thought about that when we were writing our regs and looking at how we were gonna regulate things, and tried to sort of keep our eye on treating all the cities, meeting all of the city's needs with the full understanding you can't make everyone happy. Go ahead.
How involved do you get in the legislative process? Do you deal with them like any laws before they're passed in terms of through, or do you just mainly deal with regulations after?
That's a great question. So at MassDOT, with the RMV, which was my most interesting client of all times, there's always the newspaper article, very sad situation where somebody is either driving drunk and has an accident, and somebody perishes, right? And the person driving is not in the country legally, has no license, but is in a registered car, and so people are reading this and saying, like, who is running the RMV? How can you really? Because I feel like when I go in to get my license, I have to give, like, blood, an eyelash, like, they're scanning and probes, and I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on here? So we have been really involved in drafting new, like, regulations. What was interesting is back in 2009, there was an enabling statute that created the Mass Department of Transportation. That was really innovative, right? And then we realized later on that, okay, well, that was done great, and we'd give it maybe a B+, but there are a couple things we need to change. So I was involved in, sort of making, requesting changes to that, to the legislation. We recently filed or had a state senator file on our behalf legislation as Massport, with respect to a certain issue, and I was deeply involved in drafting that and doing the back work of making sure we met with the various political individuals that would be affected by this and their constituents potentially. But a lot of work with respect to our regulations, and then we are constantly watching new legislation that's going to be passed that would affect us in any way, and we would go through the process of me writing a memo to the CEO to say, like, right, this change will affect the following things and is not consistent, for example, with our trust agreement, or it's going to result in the following, I do talking points possibly for the CEO to make sure when he speaks with the Speaker of the House or the Senate President or others about this, that he understands all the ramifications. So legal's really involved, and certainly on the MassDOT side, much more involved with that. Other questions? Go ahead.
Can you tell us how you became president of the Massachusetts Black Lawyers Association and about your experience there?
Yeah, so I think it's really important that I know people feel like, is there enough time in the day to do all of the stuff that you want to do? You really have to be fiercely protective of your time, but it was actually one of the best experiences I think that I've had. It gives you, bar association practice gives you an opportunity to interact with, various lawyers in the community, and then also the judiciary and others. So the Chief Justice of the Federal District Court, at least once a year, has a meeting of all of the affinity bar leaders to sort of talk about, diversity in the courthouse and other issues like that. As a former federal prosecutor, I knew Chief Judge Wolf already, but I've had lots of meetings there. The way I got involved was, I had been asked to become the vice president of somebody coming in as the president, and the experience was outstanding. I mean, the year ends with a gala that we hold. We ended up having, when I was the vice president, Eric Holder, who is, of course, the Attorney General. We've had some really, really great speakers come and talk to us. And what was really important to me was kind of having lawyers more actively involved in the community, and, working working on trying to increase the number of judges of color, minority judges particularly in the Commonwealth, and working on, on educating the community about their rights with respect to sort of civil rights and other issues there. So that was the platform that I was involved with. It's a 3-year stint in most of the affinity bars. So you start as the vice president, you ascend to the president-elect, and if you're alive on the day when the president leaves, you become the president without a vote. And I will tell you, it was a lot of work, but it was one of the greatest experiences I've had. And you make great friendships, you get to meet a lot of different people, but I think we did a lot of really good work as well. Other questions?
I know people have to get to class, so I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to thank Rachel for taking the time to come speak with us today, and I think she's also going to have maybe a few minutes as we clean up
Sure,
and answer some
yeah.
questions offline as well. So
Thank you so much, guys.